Hi, and thank you for watching this episode of the Successful Franchisee's Beautiful View. Today, you won't want to miss a second of the interview with Morgan Freeman from FranFund. If you're a new business owner or you're thinking about becoming a new business owner through franchising, financing is a huge and critical piece of the whole experience. Watch the entire video as Morgan goes through all of the programs that FranFund may have available for you, the timing, and what you can expect when you work with her. Let's get going now. Welcome to this edition of the Successful Franchisee's Beautiful View. And I am honored to have on the show with me today Morgan Freeman from FranFund. If you can see Morgan Allen there in the corner of her video. She recently got married within the last year. So, Morgan, welcome. And I appreciate you coming on.
Yes, no, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and hopefully share a little bit more knowledge on kind of everything funding when it comes to starting a new business.
Absolutely. Now, how did you get into the lending and financial aspect of the business?
I have kind of an interesting backstory. So it's definitely not what I ever saw myself doing. So I went to school. I actually got into medical school and I was like, I didn't like it like I thought I would. I didn't actually end up attending. It was just I had to get my hours later and just didn't enjoy it. So I went back to school and got my master's in business with a focus in accounting and economics. And then that kind of led into I really like the financial side of things. I've always enjoyed it and eventually went into it's a little bit different, but I went into executive recruiting within financial wealth management, high level positions. Just having to understand exactly what those individuals needed to know to be successful in the roles. And a lot of that, believe it or not, had to do with educational side, understanding the financial side of things. And I loved it. But obviously, we had some downturns in the economy over time. And so that's kind of looking for new opportunities. I found FranFund. So it still gives me, I love the ability to help people. That was the thing I loved about recruiting. It was just changing their lives and making that big step. And it's the same thing that we're doing in franchising. And so it's an exciting thing to be a part of that. And then it also brings in that financial side of things, just educating people on that and making it less of a fear is kind of just why it just made it such an easy transition and made sense when joining FranFund.
Expand on that fear part just a little bit more and how you help your clients get over that aspect because that's one of the major challenges that we face as franchise consultants is helping them get beyond the fear factor.
Yeah. I feel like funding is always the scariest. It can be the scariest thing because it's kind of the fear of the unknown. It's you see this awesome adventure, like this cool franchise that has something that they love, that they're passionate about. But then it's like that fear of what does it cost? Like, can I afford that? And so that's where we're always trying to meet with candidates. The sooner the better. We always tell them it's more of an educational approach we take. We're not trying to force you to go any way, any which way when it comes to funding. It's more so our initial conversation with these candidates is to say, hey, like, what are you interested in? What does this look like? What are your long-term goals? And then that gives us a better idea of the numbers, figures that we're looking at, and we can kind of break down what their options are for them. And that can be a multitude of options. It's not, I know a lot of people think like, oh, SBA is the only way I can go. There's a lot of other opportunities out there as far as in tapping into equity that individuals have, different programs, grants will even make individuals aware of. Like we work with a lot of veterans as well that are getting out of the military that are like, what do I do now? And that's kind of why they're considering it. But money's scary, and it's not something they maybe had to deal with regularly. Most people don't on this type of level. And so that's where like we're just taking that educational approach, trying to give them as much information as possible about the funding so they can feel comfortable and confident, like, okay, these are my options. Even
Mhm.
if it's not feasible now, I at least now know what I'm working towards so I can come back prepared to start my venture, even if it's a year down the road, which we have a lot of candidates that we work with that's a very common thing.
Sure. And what are without getting into specific details, just an overview of the different options besides the SBA that you have available for you?
Yeah, so I would say in-house, what we primarily handle is going to be either SBA is the main one that we're helping candidates guide them through that process, obtain the loan, and expedite that process for them. But in addition to that, also in-house, we have the rollover program. So this is an IRS program called the Rollover for Business Startup. And what it's allowing candidates to do in a brief overview, again, we go a little bit more in depth into this generally, but it's allowing candidates to access those qualified retirement vehicles. So a lot of individuals have funds sitting in an old 401k from a previous employer. Then they really haven't touched it. Or they have funds they've transferred into a traditional IRA. Basically, the qualifiers, it has to be from a previous employer and it can't be Roth because it has to be accessible for rollover. And so a lot of times we identify that they have those funds and this rollover program that allows them to access it and invest it into their new venture. And it's not viewed as a distribution. So they're not facing any income tax, early withdrawal penalties. It's simply a rollover and reinvestment. So it's allowing them to keep their funds vested into what's their new business instead of maybe just like an Apple per se. So they're kind of investing in themselves in a way and grow this new business that they started without facing any like interest rates. In a way, they're
Sure.
starting their business debt free. So that is a heavily utilized program as well. And then in addition to that, outside of that, we do have unsecured personal loans that we'll look at. In addition to that, we will also, even though we don't offer it in-house because you'd be going local for it, we're going to look into if there's any equity that they can tap into.
Mhm.
So if someone's has a good bit of equity into real estate, or maybe they have a portfolio, a stock portfolio that they can tap into that equity as well. And so that's generally the main options that you're looking at as far as opportunities to tap into to fund your new venture.
And you mentioned veterans. They wouldn't have necessarily a 401k, but how do you help veterans in the same
Yeah.
respect?
So veterans don't have a 401k, but what you're typically going to see is a TSP. So that's where generalized it and I said basically it's from a previous employer. So as long as they are no longer um, with the military and they have that TSP, they can access it through the IRS program just like a 401k. There's a lot of other like 403B is one that we
Hmm.
see a lot. A lot of it's going to be if you worked with the government previously or things of that nature, and that's why you're going to see those different options. But as long as it's from a previous employer, it's not Roth, typically it's going to qualify for this opportunity.
Yeah. In Ohio, I know it's called PERS, and that applies for first responders and
Mhm.
teachers and folks that have worked for the Ohio government. So,
It's
um,
like you, and it varies from state to state, which is
oh yeah,
crazy, all the different retirement vehicles per se that there are out there.
sure. Now, at what point, with let's say that one of your clients is working with a franchise consultant like me, and I know that I'm gonna, if they're interested and they're picking a brand, a specific brand to do their due diligence, I'm automatically going to introduce them to you right away just to explore their options. But for the folks that are watching that may not be working with me, when should they be introduced to you? When should they nudge their consultant to say, "Hey, you need to introduce me to Morgan"?
Yeah. Um, Typically, because we have these talks a lot that are like when, because that's always the question,
Right.
especially with individuals that are new within consulting as well. We always say the earlier the better.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, the last thing we want is we're getting these people and they're like, I'm going to my last meeting with the franchise tomorrow. And it's like, oh, okay. We we can make this happen, but obviously earlier the better. And so we will tell people after, generally speaking, the most ideal time we'll sometimes say is like after the unit economics talk with the franchises. That's only because then at that point they're going to have an idea of the total project cost that they're looking at for that venture. And so it allows us to break it down a little bit better for them and give them a clearer picture. I think it always helps people too when they can see a figure to go off of. Because sometimes we will talk with them a little bit earlier. It can be a little bit more confusing to them because they don't know what they're working with and they're like, I don't know what this costs. And so it's just trying to give them enough general information to understand what they can touch and tap into. But it is a little bit helpful when they have a number and they're like, okay, this is my goal and they know what they're working towards. It just paints a better picture for them. So I feel like they retain a lot more. But again, sooner the better because at the end of the day, we want to make sure before they're going to that last meeting, which again can be called a multitude of things by these franchises, if it's a discovery day, meet the team day, confirmation day, because that's where that franchise who has vetted them as well is making their final decision. And a lot of times they're looking for, like, if they're going SBA, a lot of times they want to see a pre-approval letter before that meeting. Some of them won't even set up the meeting, which you're probably aware of, without that pre-approval letter, because they just want to make sure, like, we're not putting someone in a bad situation
Mhm.
where they don't even have funding set up. And that's, again, what they say responsible franchising, because they want to make sure that these people are successful too, and they're putting them in a good situation. And so that's why, again, the sooner the better, so we can get that set up for them when they're scheduling those final discussions with the franchises.
Yeah, and I equate the pre-approval letter that you're able to create to like the home buying, somebody that's buying a home for the first time. So explain a little
Exactly.
bit more about that pre-approval and what that looks like and the timing. How long does it take to obtain that letter?
Yeah. And I would say that's a great analogy. I say I say it all the time. So I just think it's important, like, to put yourself on the same page of where these candidates are. And most people have bought in a home. If they haven't, they have a better understanding than buying a business. So, always correlated to that and a multitude of other things throughout the process. I'm like, this is like when you buy a home, the down payment. It's the same thing here.
Mhm.
But with the pre-approval letter, essentially what that is what we're doing is basically bringing them through the process for SBA. We're making sure, okay, you meet these minimal qualifiers. And then at that point, too, we do need to have them, basically, we're bringing them through that process when they've had it narrowed down to like two or three options as far as franchises, because we need to know what that high end is that they're going through pre-approval at. And then once they go through this pre-approval process, again, it's the same thing that you would expect. Just like when you're buying a home, you're filling out a preliminary application. We got to see what those finances look like to give you that pre-approval. And then once we review that and we know, okay, this is feasible and we hand over that pre-approval, what that is telling candidates, this is possible. I can finalize this loan. And again, it's just like buying a home. They want to see this, just like when you're going to buy a home, you work with a person who's selling homes, broker, whatever that may be. They want to see, okay, what are you pre-approved for? So what can I show you? It's
Right.
the same thing that you want to see as a consultant as well, because it's like, okay, what are they pre-approved for? Like, what are their options? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that your time is used wisely as well. And so that is what that pre-approval is presenting to them and reassuring these candidates as well that this is a viable option for them if they go this route.
Outstanding. Thank you. What type of trends have you seen in the franchising world in the last 6 to 9 months?
Um, because a lot of people were, because the election. The election says it all. The last 6 to 9 months, everyone was asking about it. I would say what's crazy to me and is so impressive about this industry, because I will say prior to coming into this industry, I I had a little experience, like in college, I had run and managed a franchise. So I understood that overview of everything and I knew how it looked. But it was so interesting to me coming from like the business world where the economy is so, it affects heavily what, like, if jobs let goes, layoffs are happening, just like what we saw with the pandemic and things like that. And then I come into franchising and it's like, it doesn't seem that there's ever really a huge shift. Because at the end of the day, I think people realize like, I want to work for myself. I want to start a new venture. There's never going to be a great time. Like the economy is always going to change. And so I just think the coolest thing about franchising is like, there isn't a huge shift. There's always interest. There's always people and out there that are like, I don't want to work for somebody anymore. So, and they realize that like I'm gonna have ups and downs. Like it's expected. I've lived for 30 something years. Like I know how that works. But they just want to do their own thing and they want to know at the end of the day, I'm not gonna go to work and lose my job today. Like I have my job. So I think that's the coolest thing about franchising is that I haven't seen like there isn't these huge shifts that you see. Obviously at the end of the year you always see where people are like, all right, gotta get these things rolling. Or at the start of the year, that's where people have their New Year's resolutions and you'll see an in uptake of just interest on like, all right, let's start something new. But overall it's fairly steady even with the election. People obviously were predicting certain things and they know like things will change throughout time, but they were still interested and excited about the opportunity. I know that's not a direct answer, but I
Oh,
hope
that's
it answers.
fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Now, we've also started working with small businesses that are exploring their franchise options. How does FranFund work with emerging franchisors?
So, FranFund, we actually have a franchise relationship department. So, this is made up of two individuals that are creating and fostering these relationships, especially with like these early emerging ZORs, because they want to educate them on the funding side of things. Okay, what does this look like? What are these things that you can offer to your future franchisees as far as funding goes, and how to create that success through time? And so that's where, again, it's more of, again, it's the educational approach. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people have these resources and that's kind of how FranFund came to be. Our founders saw that there was a gap in the industry that you're going to the internet and you're looking up funding and 30 different things pop up on the same thing and they're all different and it's like, okay, well, what can I trust? I don't know who to get information from. I go to one institution, they tell me something different than the other institution. And so that is where they saw that need and that just the educational approach that was needed in the market, that one-stop shop when it came to funding, so candidates can come and feel like, okay, I know, like, I feel so much better. Like, I did a little bit of research, but I finally got some confirmation on, like, okay, this is legitimate. Um, and so, overall, that's the same educational approach we're taking in that side of things. They are trying to get out there and network with those individuals that are trying to expand to make sure that they're set up on the financial side of things for their future franchisees, and they know exactly what our process looks as well, so they can utilize us as a resource too.
Thank you. And what can a client expect as far as the timing? So let's say that today I send you a client and they've got a couple of brands that they're looking at. And how long from the time they talk to you today until they get this pre-approval letter? Just a ballpark figure. I know it's going to vary for each client, but a rough idea.
Yeah. So I will share part of our SBA process is helping expedite the process for candidates. So our timeline looks a little bit shorter than what your nationwide average is going to be, that 90 to 120 days. So ours is that 30 to 60 day marker.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you're going to say, okay, 30, that's still pretty large variance. Like what's going on there? A lot of that's just going back to, is this a brick and mortar where you have construction build out? Or is this a service-based business where maybe you don't have to obtain a letter of intent for the leasing agreement, things of that nature? There's a lot more paperwork until when you have a build out for a brick and mortar. And so that's where a service-based business, you're typically going to see them fall within that 30 to 60 day marker and more closer to the 30 day. As long as these candidates are working with us throughout this process, there's no issue there. Um, Typically we have candidates fall more towards that 30-day marker. If they have a build out, some of the uncontrollables are finding that space, like
Mhm.
finding that leasing space too. And that can take some time. And so that's where it's, again, you want to put them more towards that 60, 90-day marker, just because that's an uncontrollable that they obviously, if they're doing that sooner, the better. But if they are waiting to do that, can't find the right space, it can add some time onto it.
Yep. Thank you. And what haven't I asked you that your client should know from this interview about FranFund or how you work?
Um, FranFund itself, I will say the company as a whole, we care. Every every individual that works with the company, I think that's the biggest part that I love about this company is that we really care. We care about the fact that we get to change lives every day. So I think that just plays a huge part in our success because we're a 97% referral-based business.
Mhm.
I think it kind of goes to show with that. But as far as specifics, I don't know if there's necessarily, I'm trying to think. There's always tidbits that we get asked about, like, what are some like SBA tidbits? What do you always get asked about? What we get asked about a lot is with SBA, because collateral is always a piece that people are worried about with loans. And so general guideline with SBA is if that loan amount falls above 500,000, that is where banks are required to ask for collateral. If it falls below that amount, that's where lenders are allowed to be flexible and not ask for that collateral, which typically we're not seeing our network of lenders asking for that. And so that's, I think, that's a huge part. That's also because a lot of people are not comfortable with putting up any type of like lien against the real estate or anything of that nature. So it's just giving people that reassurance, like this is still very much feasible without having to put up that collateral. And so that I feel like a lot of times makes people more comfortable. But other than that, there hasn't been, I think that's like the general we get asked about. I was trying to think if there's anything else. Other than that, people will ask, like, well, if you only offer this in-house, like, do you talk about the other things? We always talk about the other things. We're always just making sure that we're laying out all options. I just got off the phone prior to this and was like, a lot of times, if people can tap into equity, it's a lot faster. And depending on people's timeline, we're like, okay, if you need this done now, this is probably going to be a better fit for you than maybe
Mhm.
SBA, just because of like where we're at. Um, and so we're having those honest conversations with them. We're making sure they know every feasible option out there, and things to be aware of. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what anyone can ask for. I don't think it's just our business. I think it's anything. If you can be honest, you can help them, even if it's maybe not what you provide. I think they appreciate that. And a lot of times that's why we're able to work with friends and family of theirs and things of that nature.
Sure. And
Yeah.
we talked about the SBA 30 to 60 days. What is an equivalent time frame for a Rob's to be able to be accessible for a client?
Yeah. And I'm sorry I focused a little bit on the SBA.
That's
We just
okay.
got off the topic.
Yeah.
The ROBS, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to complete.
Okay.
So it's fairly quick turnaround to be able to gain access to those funds. The other benefit about the rollover program as well is once you gain access to those funds, if you incur any business expenses prior to that, you will be able to reimburse yourself to your personal bank account through those funds because it is viewed as a business expense. You obviously just didn't have access to it at that point. So I think that's a huge part that comes into play for a lot of candidates.
Very good. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for being on today's program and thank you for all your help that you've provided for my clients. I can attest Morgan does a fantastic job and all of my clients rave about you once they're done going through the process. So thanks again, Morgan, and thank you all for watching this episode of the Successful Franchisee's Beautiful View. Stay safe and win every day.
Thanks, Lee. Bye, guys.